Imagine entering one of the most extravagant palaces the world has ever witnessed, with gilded corridors, sparkling chandeliers, and enough silk and satin to cover the earth twice over. Yet, if you paused to take a breath, you would encounter a stench so overpowering it could wither a bouquet of roses from 20 paces away. Yes, welcome to the Grand Palace of Versailles during the 17th century, a place where beauty clashed with cruelty, elegance coexisted with filth, and noble women, despite their treasures and titles, faced a nightmare of hygiene. Today, we are diving headfirst, figuratively speaking fortunately, into the astonishingly unhygienic lives of aristocratic ladies at the peak of French royal authority. Here are the 5 most shocking hygiene practices among noble women, and prepare yourself, because they are horrifying. If you were born into nobility in 17th century France, grace, charm, and impeccable style were expected of you. But personal cleanliness was an unfortunate exception. Bathing, which we now link with purity and health, was largely shunned and regarded with dread. At the time, medical knowledge was far behind common sense. Physicians believed that warm water was harmful and opened pores to dangerous illnesses, allowing invisible threats hidden in the air to invade the body. Further complicating matters, the Church, wielding enormous influence, condemned bathhouses as places of vanity and temptation. As a result, society gradually rejected the use of water for cleanliness. Moreover, private bathing facilities for women were virtually unheard of. Luxury showers every day were almost unheard of back then. In reality, people seldom bathed thoroughly. A full body wash was viewed as unnecessary, risky, or even immoral. Instead, most aristocrats, including royal women, simply used a damp cloth to clean their hands, faces, and sometimes their necks. These cloths were not drenched in plain water, but often moistened with substances like alcohol, vinegar, or even spit, believed to cleanse without exposing the skin too much. To make the situation more gloomy, baths, which were a rare occasion, were typically communal. Family members bathed one by one in the same tub of water. Naturally, men bathed first, and by the time women joined, the water was tepid, murky, and full of grime, assuming there was any water left at all. The impact on the royal residences was undeniable. The smell was pervasive, not stopping within the stables. Visitors frequently remarked on the strong aroma filling the corridors of Versailles, a bizarre blend of stale perfume, body odor, animal fat, and dampness. It was not that the nobility ignored appearances. They simply had a very different understanding of cleanliness. This was especially true for women who were supposed to embody beauty and elegance. The contradiction was almost brutal. Wrapped in fine fabrics, weighed down by gems and powdered flawlessly, beneath lay skin that had not encountered soap for months. This was the true essence of looking perfect from the outside, far from being impressive up close. Now, if the absence of regular washing was not enough, the next hygiene practice, or rather the total lack of it, is something we definitely take for granted. Nowadays, toilets. The Palace of Versailles stood as an architectural masterpiece, overflowing with opulence and housing some of Europe's most influential figures. But here is the surprising part. It barely had any proper toilet facilities. That is correct, hundreds of chambers, thousands of visitors, and hardly a working bathroom anywhere. Instead, the royal household depended on chamber pots. These small portable containers were placed beneath beds behind curtains or inside closets. When nature called, you would use your pot, and then someone else, if not yourself, would throw its contents out the window. If the wind was unlucky, or the street below overly busy, some unfortunate individual might experience an unpleasant surprise. Several courtiers did not even bother with pots. Men often urinated from balconies, or relieved themselves among the palace gardens. Guests and foreign officials were shocked by what they saw. This was not an isolated occurrence. It was a widespread problem. The palace became notorious for its intense foul odor, and many hallways served as makeshift latrines. Imagine being a lady, gracefully moving through the corridors, in your intricate gown, lifting your skirts carefully, not only to display your embroidery, but also to avoid stepping in human excrement. Things became so intolerable that by 1715, a royal order mandated that the palace hallways should be cleaned once every week. Not every day, and not after every occasion, but only once a week, because that was seen as an advancement. Now, let's discuss cleaning after using the restroom. Modern comforts like toilet paper were non-existent back then. Instead, people relied on cloth fragments, leaves, straw, or, in extreme situations, even their own hands. Washing afterward was minimal or sometimes skipped altogether, when your method of waste disposal was simply tossing it out a window, and your cleaning practice was questionable at best. It is no surprise that parasites and illnesses were widespread. If Versailles represented the core of Europe's craze for fashion, the most vibrant expression of this passion was found in the wigs and hairstyles of noblewomen. These were far from ordinary styles. They were like architectural masterpieces. Hairdos would reach heights of several feet above the head, decorated with ribbons, pearls, tiny gardens, and even small ships. Yes, ships that looked just like the real thing perched atop a woman's head, sailing on waves of powdered curls. To build such elaborate designs, women filled their hair with all kinds of materials, such as wire frameworks, horsehair, and padding made from wool or cotton. Once the structure was set, they used generous amounts of pomade made from animal fat, mostly beef tallow. This helped shape the style and keep it intact. However, this greasy substance created a warm and sticky environment that was very inviting to lice, since hair washing was infrequent, and wigs were rarely removed just for cleaning. Lice infestations were not merely ordinary, they were almost guaranteed. Colonies of these tiny pests flourished in those elaborate hairstyles. The towering hairstyles favored by the ladies of the court required special tools, such as long-handled silver lice claws, designed to scratch itchy scalps without disturbing their elegant appearance. These claws were intricately decorated and often brought along to dinners or social gatherings, where a woman might discreetly scratch her head between sips of wine. Despite the irritation, no one dared miss the fashion show. In the strict hierarchy of court life, outward appearance equaled power. To fail in style or dress poorly meant risking one's social rank. Even if a scalp was infested with lice and hair coated in old grease, the performance had to continue. Wigs were not just uncomfortable or unhygienic. They also posed real dangers. Some were so heavy they caused persistent neck pain. Others could catch fire from nearby candles. Yet, all this was the cost of preserving one's standing at court. Poor women faced no such burden because they simply shaved their heads to avoid lice entirely. For noble women, however, their hair symbolized their status, even if it concealed an entire ecosystem beneath. Now, turning to another subject meant to bring pleasure, food. Royal banquets were famous for their abundance, with tables overloaded with meat pies, pastries, roasted birds, and sugared fruits. Yet, behind this lavish display lay a troubling reality, as royal kitchens, like the palace itself, were plagued by sanitation problems. The plumbing system at Versailles was notoriously inadequate and often a source of contamination. The conditions were so dire that raw sewage would occasionally flow back into the cooking spaces. There are records indicating that on at least one occasion, wastewater infiltrated Queen Marie Antoinette's private kitchen. The effect on food safety was catastrophic. Lacking adequate refrigeration, ventilation, or waste disposal, contamination was rampant. Meat spoiled swiftly, fruits and vegetables were left exposed for several days, and pests roamed unchecked. Despite these hazards, the cooks had no option but to continue preparing meals that could be dangerous for consumption, even for the highest echelons of society. The results were widespread gastrointestinal suffering. Symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, and infections were commonplace. Yet, the most alarming threats were parasitic infestations. Members of the royal court were often afflicted by intestinal worms, particularly tapeworms, due to poorly cooked meat and unsanitary kitchen conditions. Even the great Louis XIV was not immune. He reportedly expelled a tapeworm measuring 6 inches in length, a stark illustration that even the most powerful individual in France could not escape the consequences of poor hygiene. For the women of the court, dining was a refined performance. They were expected to eat with grace, engage in conversation and flirtation, raise toasts, and entertain their guests. However, beneath this elegant show, many suffered from nausea, abdominal pain, and more serious illnesses. All endured silently to preserve their appearance. At last, we come to what might be the most personal and agonizing experience in a woman's life: childbirth. For aristocratic women, it was not only painful, but also a public event. In 17th-century France, when a queen or a noblewoman of high rank, when a woman went into labor, it was regarded as a significant national occasion. Literally, the delivery chamber would be crowded with courtiers, physicians, priests, and aristocratic spectators, all present merely to observe. They did not come to assist or provide comfort, but solely to watch. When Queen Marie Therese gave birth, the space was so congested that it felt more like a theater than a place for medical care. The reason behind this was that royal births had to be witnessed to avoid any scandal. People feared that a stillborn infant or a daughter could be secretly replaced with a healthy son. Therefore, the entire event had to unfold in the full presence of onlookers. This meant that the mother, likely enduring intense pain and emotional turmoil, was never without an audience at such a vulnerable time in her life. Privacy and dignity were completely absent, replaced only by expectation and observation. Marie Antoinette, for example, famously lost consciousness after giving birth due to the stifling heat and the overwhelming number of people in her quarters. She was far from alone in this experience. Numerous women fainted, wept, or encountered medical issues while being watched, as if performing on a stage. Childbirth in that era was fraught with danger, as medical knowledge was limited and there were no antibiotics available. Approximately 1 out of every 3 children died before reaching 3 years of age. Mothers also faced high death rates, especially from infections caused by unclean hands and contaminated instruments. Thus, royal births, while celebrated nationwide, were also filled with great dread and physical agony. The emotional burden on women forced to give birth under intense pressure, constant surveillance, and ticking threats was truly overwhelming. Here is what you get: 5 ugly truths from the glittering halls of royalty. Behind the shining dresses, fragrant corridors, and sparkling crowns, Noble women endured lives marked by discomfort, humiliation, and perils that would make readers today feel uneasy. They appeared as symbols of elegance and refinement, publicly but privately. They endured pain, scratched, and fought to survive in ways that history often leaves out. If you believed royal existence was only about elegant gowns and lavish feasts, reconsider. The reality is more complicated and undeniably human. Until we meet again, keep delving into history because the past is not only intriguing, it can also be shockingly raw